General Haig, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how about that B-3 strike? Is it going to get off, or do we hear yet, or
Yes,
what?
sir. As of now, it's on schedule and the weather's favorable, and that would be the only thing that would
Stop it, right?
be postponed.
That would be starting tonight, then,
Yes,
or today.
6 o'clock our time.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
That's a felony right there.
This is still like, it's all kind of still, this is still really close to it all actually happening, right? So this is, was it June?
This is less than a week.
Right.
This is on June 23rd, and it happened on June 17th.
And it still took, there's still a couple more years to go before...
A year, a bit more than a year. Yeah, so he's banged to rights there. No two ways about it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, the rest of the country, or the rest of the world, don't really know any details. Because the way we've told this story, I've told you everything that's happened already.
Yeah.
So, but like the FBI don't really know what's going on. All they know is that there's some dodgy CIA maybe guys that have broken in, and that the Washington Post have sort of got some details about Hunt, but they don't even know about Liddy or anything yet, I don't think. But it is sort of, Nixon and the people at the top realised that it's to do with Mitchell, John Mitchell, you know, the Alfred Hitchcock pipe smoking guy. Mm-hmm. And over the next few days, they talk a lot about that Mitchell, if it sort of explodes and the press and or the FBI sort of start investigating, they can push it up as far as Mitchell, but that's where responsibility has got to be cut off and stop there. They talk about that sort of thing. And Nixon, for the first time in the next few days, talks about John Dean, who, as I said, as his counsel, is like this younger kid or younger man who is really bright, but isn't a massive, massive top boy in the administration. But Nixon speaks to him about it for the first time over the next few days. There's a minor bit I should mention. John Mitchell's wife, Martha Mitchell, was a bit of a drunk, really. It's not a kind of way to put it. And she would sometimes deliberately, but sometimes when it wasn't authorised, would leak things. She would. It's been described the whole of Washington being one big giant leak. I've heard it described like that. But Martha Mitchell would sometimes get on the phone to her friend who worked as a journalist and just tell her tidbits. Jesus. You know how it goes. That's how the game's played sometimes, isn't it? Like a source close to the president has said, You know, it's people like this. So anyway, one time she's talking to one of her contacts in the press world that she's pissed off that there's stuff going on. Dodgy stuff going. She hints that there's dodgy stuff going on about the Watergate, and her friend who works for the press later reported that the phone just went dead, and what happened? A Secret Service guy just ripped the phone off the wall, and then John Mitchell gets her committed, so she can't speak.
No way.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ! Did Mitchell know about this?
I don't know. Mitchell's out of his mind right now. Martha put her head through a plate glass window.
Jesus. Through a window?
Yeah, they're taking her to Bellevue. Maybe she'll stay this time.
Yeah. Well, Martha's an idiot. She'll do anything to get Mitchell's attention. If Mitchell had been minding the store instead of that, not Martha, we wouldn't have this kid Magruder running some third-rate burglary.
Well, the thing is, I think she'd been sort of committed before, you know, just for a few days or whatever, and she was a bit of a really bad drunk. And John Mitchell, of course, ex-Attorney General, is really powerful, and you know, if you've had someone in your family that had been committed before, I think it's relatively easy for it to happen again. You just say, oh, they've relapsed or whatever. And of course, he's a massive figure of the establishment, and she's just like his drunk, unstable wife. So he's like, right, get her committed, and she was.
Then I think it was fairly fairly easy. Maybe even now, but it's still fairly easy to get women committed for.
Yeah, just say they're hysterical.
Yeah, they're hysterical. They're unstable, or like they're a typical woman. They can't control themselves, so lock them up. And that's horrific, isn't it? Just
Yeah,
you can get
it
someone.
just shows you the measure of these people, really. I think.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Terrifying.
Oh, over the next few days, on the 1st of July, they talk more about Liddy, that if they can make it stop at Liddy, then Mitchell won't have to go down. Because, of course, Mitchell is one of Nixon's oldest friends and closest political rivals, and not rivals, friends, closest political allies. And, if someone really, really close to the Prime Minister or the President or the leader goes down, then it's really close to the leader. So you want to protect your closest guys at all costs, really, because... once they go down, it looks like your whole government is weak and that, you can't control things. So they want to try and keep it from Mitchell if they can. They just talk a lot about trying to make Liddy take the blame. On the 6th of July, he talks to Ehrlichman for the first time, which is funny to me. That it's a fair while after it's happened that he talks to Ehrlichman, because in the end we find out Ehrlichman's really involved. And Ehrlichman brings him more bad news. He tells him that Hunt was involved in all sorts of stuff for the White House. That he was involved in discrediting Edward Kennedy after that girl died in his car. Do you know about that?
Yeah, vaguely. I think.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
Yeah.
He crashed a car and it fell in a pond and a girl died and he just fled the scene. But wasn't prosecuted for anything and rerun for the Senate later that year or the next year and won. It's fine. It's a Kennedy. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about what happened.
There's a lot of stuff like that happen, and I'm sure it still goes on now. And I'm sure it's sort of stuff that comes out years later when important people have died and other people are getting older and their conscience is weighing heavy on them, and and stories come out, don't they? And yeah, I'm sure shit like this gets covered up all the time. And how many senators get in trouble and then get out of trouble without anyone ever hearing about it? A girl went missing or died or whatever, and it's stuff that at that level, I'm sure.
Well, Laura
gets
Bush
covered up
killed
by
someone in a car crash, didn't she? Did you know that?
Did she?
Yeah, when she was young,
I don't remember that.
before she was married, she had a car crash in which the guy in the other car died, and she wasn't prosecuted for it or anything. Oh, it happened to be her ex-boyfriend as well. She's weird.
And Matthew Broderick.
And Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're a celebrity, rich and famous, you get away with it. Patrick Kluivert, I think, killed someone in a car accident and just got sort of community service or something. Yeah, so Ehrlichman tells Nixon that Hunt was involved in all sorts of things, the bad pigs, discrediting Kennedy, even the DM assassinations, and obviously the Ellsberg break-in. And it's at this point that if things were legit, you would expect Nixon to either go mad at Ehrlichman, or at least after the meeting speak to other people going, I've just been told by Ehrlichman that we're involved in all sorts of shady crap. But he doesn't. He's just like listening quietly a lot of the times, going, yeah. So it's things like that. It's what's not said on these tapes that I think is the more interesting sometimes. Because imagine you're president and your top guy, your second top guy, comes to you and said, yeah, a guy that we're paying that's on our payroll, that's worked for us openly, is involved in loads of different criminal stuff. You would expect, like I said before, just for Nixon to go, wait, stop everything. Get everyone in here now. We're going to have a clean out here of what's gone on, but just doesn't.
Was Ehrlichman saying, like, I've always known about this, or is Ehrlichman saying to him at that point, I've investigated Hunt? Is it Hunt?
Howard Hunt, yeah.
Yeah. So Ehrlichman's saying, I've looked into Hunt, and I've just suddenly found out all this stuff that he's been doing for us over the years. Or is Ehrlichman owning up to say, like, I've got to tell you that I know about Hunt and he's been doing this stuff for years?
Well, it's basically him saying, I'm learning about this now myself.
Right.
But, and this is the weird thing about these Nixon tapes, is that it's not entirely that. It's like Nixon never explicitly asks that question.
Right.
And, reading between the lines, anyone that can even remotely read between the lines would know that Ehrlichman knew loads of this stuff already.
Sure, yeah.
But not all of it, and certainly not in detail. And I don't. So yeah, it's that weird thing where Ehrlichman's sort of giving Nixon enough information for Nixon to sort of be able to keep making decisions and stuff, but not all of the information, because that could or would lead down the line to both of them getting in terrible trouble. And again, they're like skating that weird line between where they'll be able to sort of perjure themselves further down the line. It's fucked up, it really is. And then, like I say, the fact that Nixon doesn't just explode, I'll go, what the hell, man? We've been friends forever. I've given you this crazy thing, and you're telling me now that you're involved in all sorts. Like, well, anyway, that's how it goes. Later, the next few days, well, this is the thing. It's kind of going slow. It's only in the press. It's going slow. It's only the Washington Post that really keep up the pressure with putting stories on the front page a lot of the days. A lot of the other big newspapers sort of let it go because it seems like a sort of an and finally story almost at this point. It's certainly not blown up. Behind the scenes, Nixon's talking a lot about Magruder. I mentioned Magruder was directly under Mitchell at the campaign to re-elect the president over at Creep, and he was the guy that gave orders directly to Liddy. So if it's going to go any higher than Liddy, who the police have already got, Magruder's next. And so Nixon, they all know this, and so Nixon's just really worried about whether Magruder's going to perjure himself and whether they're going to be able to keep him quiet, and talking about whether
Magruder
he's
definitely gave the order to Liddy.
Yeah.
And Hunt gave the order to
the actual 5 burglars.
To the team.
So
So they've got that chain up to that point.
Well, the FBI have got 7 people. There's the 5 burglars and Hunt and Liddy.
Yeah.
And Liddy's above Hunt, basically.
Yeah. So so they're worried about it going as high as Magruder, who is the campaign for the re-election dude.
Yeah.
Right.
Second in command there.
And who's above him? Who's the next guy on the chain?
John Mitchell.
Right.
John Mitchell, the pipe smoker that Nixon wants to protect at all costs.
Right. Okay.
So they're talking about Magruder. Can we
throw him to the wolves, sort of thing?
Right. And what kind of is his personality strong enough to sort of lie under oath and stuff for them if they need him to?
Yeah.
Which they do. They do want him to lie under oath, so it will stop there.
Yeah.
They basically want to take the rap. Yeah. Oh, and they realise that Liddy and Hunt will have to go down, so that's more people to sort of worry about. But the main thing is that it doesn't get to Mitchell at this point. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah. And
afterwards, Nixon says, quote, "We'll pardon the whole kit and caboodle after the election." Because, of course, this is election year in November.
Right.
It's the presidential election.
Yeah.
So that's why all this stuff is sensitive. It's why Nixon's so sort of pissed off on micromanaging it, because it's in the months running up to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like we say, that oldie worldy language, the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
He goes off to Camp David at the end of July, where him and Haldeman just talk about it again and again and again. One of Nixon's things is that he will go over the same stuff again and again and again in the same conversation with the same people. It's weird. It's like, it's almost like some sort of psychological malady where he just, I don't know what, he just keeps going over and over it. And Haldeman sort of panders to it. Haldeman's an arch sycophant, really. He does whatever Nixon wants a lot of the time. It's probably what accounts for a lot of the downfall. On the 1st of August, they start talking about money for the first time. These 5 burglars and Hunt and Liddy, are going to go down possibly for years and years. And they're sort of asking, through the back channels, through John Dean, they're asking for money to pay for their lawyers' bills. It's probably going to be tens of thousands of dollars. Wow. And more money for their families, because they're going to be in prison for years and years and years. You know, the idea is that if they're quiet, if they just don't say, if they plead the fifth or even perjure themselves, they need money.
They want to be taken care of, yeah.
Yeah, like Hunt's mostly, he's like asked for like $120,000 for starters. And they give him some. They give him like tens of thousands of dollars. They get it to his wife. And
how can they even do that? That's insane.
Yeah.
because money is traceable, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, money has to be accounted for, pretty
Sure.
much. And
Sure.
like, who's it coming from?
Yeah.
Who's paying them then? Because obviously you follow the money back to who's paying them, and then therefore you've got the person who's given the orders, and therefore they're guilty, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
going anywhere near that is crazy.
Well, that's one of the things. In the film All the President's Men, with Robert Redford
Yeah, I saw it when I was younger.
and Dustin Hoffman, there's a bit in that where they have their reporters, Woodward and Bernstein from the Washington Post. They've got a secret informant, Deep Throat, who tells them follow the money.
I have to do this my way. You tell me what you know, and I'll confirm. I'll keep you in the right direction if I can, but that's all. Just follow the money.
So you're exactly right. That is how it eventually all gets busted open. It's just through that.
Like in The Wire. Yeah.
I have not seen The Wire. Everyone says it's great.
Yeah, they use that in that, basically.
Really?
They use that quote, follow the money, from
yeah. Well, that's a deep thing. Actually, I'll quickly say about that. No one was able to find out who Deep Throat was until he actually revealed himself in 2005 as a really, really old man, and he died a few years later of old age. And so, until 2005, it remained a secret as to who exactly it was.
Yeah, I remember in the news, yeah.
Oh, I can reveal now who was
Please.
Deep Throat. It was Mark Felt of the FBI, the second in command at the FBI.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. It's such a senior thing. Yeah. He was meeting in underground basements with sort of mid-level reporters.
So was he just like super pissed off that he didn't get the top job or something?
That, and that the FBI was being toyed with by the White House.
Yeah, I guess.
And that he'd been passed over. Well, those are the main reasons.
But yeah.
He had his own agenda. It was kind of complicated. But the thing is, people in the FBI, some people near him knew, and they told John Dean quite quickly. And within a few weeks of Deep Throat giving information to the Washington Post, they knew. The White House knew who it was.
Really?
But but Nixon, classic Nixon, he doesn't want to remove him because then he'll know that he knows. Does that make sense? Nixon doesn't want to fire Felt because then Felt will know that Nixon knows it's him.
Right. Why would that be bad?
Or just because, if keep your enemies closer.
Right.
One of those things.
Yeah.
If they know who he is, they can even feed him false information if they wanted. Right. Yeah, quite a lot of the time, some of the information that Deep Throat gave the Washington Post was wrong.
Really?
Some of it, yeah. But anyway, that's an aside. Back at the heart of it all, Nixon, all over this period, over the next few weeks, Nixon's, I mean, this is running up just a few months out from the election. They're just really, really worried about if Magruder will hold up under sort of scrutiny. And Nixon, by the beginning of August, is really, really worried about it because he realises that if Magruder goes down, almost certainly Mitchell will have to go down. And then it's the dominoes, like Haldeman will probably be implicated. And then, you're in real trouble at that point. Again, in early August, the way Nixon talks about the IRS is crazy. One of the craziest things. He talks about it as though it's almost like his personal toy to screw with whoever he wants. Whenever anyone pisses him off, like Larry O'Brien, one of the leading lights in the Democratic Party, he's like, God damn it, I want the IRS to go through his personal finances and fine-tooth comb. And he says that about loads of people, threatening them with the IRS at every turn. And he does, in fact, get the IRS to go through O'Brien's personal finances, and there's nothing there. They always complained that Howard Hughes, the billionaire, gave him loads of money. And I think he did, but just legitimately, Howard Hughes gave money to both sides of the aisle. You know how it is when you're a billionaire, you just play both sides.
Yeah.
So, it's just another example of how Nixon's just abuses his power just all the time. I mean, it's relatively minor, that, getting the IRS to investigate someone. It's not like...
but like...
It's bullshit.
People go down for financial stuff. That's a perfectly legitimate way of getting someone locked up. or just really fucking with them. Like they do that now with people who Al Capone, that kind of way,
Oh yeah.
but they do it with with like Wesley Snipes and stuff
Oh
as
yeah.
well. Like, because he's like
Yeah.
an anti-government, and he sort of he's refusing to pay tax for like moral reasons or whatever. He's like in a compound somewhere or something. I don't know. But then they
Yeah, I think he
yeah.
said income tax is just an illegal thing,
Right,
and
there you
just
go.
refused to
So
pay it
and then
on
they
millions
just
and millions and millions of dollars.
yeah, and then they just done him over. And then when he caved in and said, yeah, okay, I'll pay it, they said no, it's like too late or whatever. They just
Yeah.
that's still totally unacceptable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I said it wasn't that bad, I was sort of thinking on the terms of, crimes that people like Stalin or Mao
Well, yeah,
did.
okay.
It's not that bad, but yeah, it's still a scumbag move. I mean, anyone who's actually got the rule of law forefront in their mind wouldn't do that. Wouldn't even think of it, really. I mean, you're just not playing the game fairly at all. But, it's probably the world Nixon was used to, though, that his political opponents could or would have done stuff like that to him. I mean, he's always complaining on this day as well, and just throughout it, he's just complaining that the Democrats do dirty tricks. And
that justifies it totally, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And that Kennedy bugged him back in '60, and all this stuff.
He's seeming like a really sort of petty, small-minded kind of fellow, from what I gather from what you're saying.
Yeah, really petty, I think. Considering you're a president, considering you should be above it, you would hope that would be a prerequisite.
Or even
but no,
you should have other concerns. Like, what aren't you thinking most of the time about what the Russians are doing and like what's going on in Vietnam and like the energy crisis or whatever else was going on in '72?
Absolutely. I mean, it gets worse. At this point, I may have given the impression they're talking about it all the time. They're not. Talk about it a bit in at the end of June, quite a lot. But by this stage, it's the odd conversation here and there. But later, when it all blows up, it's basically all of Nixon's time. It's nearly all of his time is devoted to it, and it's crazy. Yeah, you think he just basically lets Henry Kissinger control all foreign policy because he's dealing with Watergate. It's mental. Okay, on the 7th of August, there's a telling exchange between Nixon and Ehrlichman, where, as I mentioned, there's loads of protesters outside, loads, all the time. It's like constantly, it really is under siege. I remember Coulson telling an anecdote where he had to stay in the White House over an entire weekend when he didn't want to or hadn't planned to because they just couldn't get out. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And Ehrlichman says, talking about the blacks, quote, that they should be stuck in boxcars, quote, and sent round the country to work as domestics rather than congregating in cities.
Jesus.
Now, if that isn't like a 1920s, 1930s attitude,
yeah.
I mean, Ehrlichman's younger than Nixon, so, but still, that's like the second, third most powerful guy in the country.
Man.
And Nixon doesn't say anything like, what? What are you talking about, you bigot? Like, Nixon's just like, yeah. And they just move on and talk about something else. They also talk about, Nixon and Ehrlichman on this day also just talk about various journalists. There's one called Jack Anderson. And they just talk about how they'll try and get prosecutions running against them after the election. Any way they can, just find anything they can, really. Just still in the mindset of dirty tricks.
The journalists that are reporting.
Yeah. So Jack Anderson's just a journalist who writes sort of unsympathetic columns. Yeah, and they want to get the IRS to look into him or see if they can get any dirt on him, anything sexual. That's one of the things that any dirt that way is always great for them.
Yeah.
So in mid-August, Magruder goes before a grand jury. Now, we don't really have anything like a grand jury in Britain, but it's like a jury but bigger. There's more of them. There's not a set number, but somewhere between 16 and 20 people. Just normal people off the street, like a jury. They're not trained lawyers or anything. And it's in secret. And these grand jurors can ask you any questions, sort of cross-examine you. And I don't think you have like a defence lawyer or anything like that. You're just getting grilled by these normal people. And there's a judge.
So
anyway,
it's a bit like a public inquiry.
Yeah, it's not public though. It's all the testimony is private. The
Yeah,
press
but like
don't get to hear
the
anything.
same kind of thing where you've got
Yeah,
it's like an investigative thing, right?
yeah,
Rather than a punishment thing. It's like something to uncover, discover the truth of what happened about something, right? It's
yeah,
not a
yeah. That's
prosecution.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you lie or found to lie, you can get done for perjury. But one of the key things is that it's all behind closed doors. Yeah, that's one of the key elements to it. That's in sort of mid-August. Between the 21st and 23rd of August, it's the Republican conference where Nixon, obviously, as sitting president, gets the nod, the nomination to run again, which he obviously accepts. So yeah, this is one of those times when there's footage of that, and they're all smiles and waves and everything, but behind closed doors, they're seriously worried about really senior guys maybe having to go to prison for doing dodgy stuff. Yeah, on August the 29th, Nixon goes before the press and just spins all sorts of lies. One of the main ones is that he says John Dean, his counsel, has done or is doing an investigation into everything Watergate related, so we can find out if there's any dodgy guys inside the administration, and all the sort of politician talk, like there's no room for this sort of thing in our system, and we're committed to making sure there's no criminals working under me, and all this sort of stuff. And knowing what we know now, it's just a bunch of lies. It's almost the opposite. Whatever he's saying, it's like the exact opposite of what they're doing behind the scenes. It's pretty mad. I understand why American people who lived through it did feel a bit traumatized. That's what they say a lot. But
yeah, right. Because he's completely doing everything he can to cover it up, to protect all the people that he possibly can, mainly himself, and to sweep it under the rug as much as possible. So
yeah. During September, there's conversations where Nixon's asking specifically for dirt on Teddy Kennedy, because Teddy Kennedy is still one of the leading lights, even though if he's not going to run for president in November 72, but he's still one of their main boys, so he wants to destroy him at all costs. So still in the mindset of just playing the same old games they'd always played. He gets told that Larry O'Brien is clean financially, and he's kind of pissed off. His bubble's a bit burst. Yeah, on the 15th of September, he meets with John Dean, who, as I say, went on to write all about it and was one of the slightly more law-abiding guys, or later anyway. But to begin with, Dean gets completely involved in it. He describes himself as like the desk officer for the entire cover-up. Like everything sort of goes through him one way or another, or a lot of it does. Now, he himself had nothing to do with it beforehand. He's just involved in the cover-up. One of the things in September, Nixon says, like, well done to him for working so hard on it and sort of keeping it, because, the actual break-in happened a couple of months ago now.
Yeah.
And Nixon says, quote, that he keeps his, quote, fingers in the dike. So, I mean, little things like that.
Yeah.
Nixon never comes out and says, well done for covering this up. But he'll say things like that, which, if you know
it's
the context.
pretty clear,
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Because, I mean, it's everyone's job, really, to protect the president and the office of the president and to do what he says. But, so someone like that who wasn't actually involved in it, someone who hasn't necessarily done anything wrong previously, just by sort of doing their job, they're implicated in a crime. The crime of covering it up. And that's just like what you're then put in a incredibly difficult position, right? Because okay, so what's his name? Dean is really a privileged guy, so maybe he's really young, so it sounds like he's been slotted into this thing because of his connections and stuff. But for a lot of people around the president, might have had to fight for years and years to get into a particular position of authority and power and stuff. And what's the incentive for you to go against the president or whoever it is? It must be so difficult to be a whistleblower, to publicly call out some criminal activity or whatever bullshit. Obviously, it happens rarely, doesn't it? Because there's so much apparatus and human psychology at play to stop people from doing stuff like that. You can see why people get drawn into this stuff. So yeah, I feel, you have to feel bad for people that are in that position.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do to an extent. You have described sort of what happened to John Dean, that he got sucked in. I mean, his job as counsel to the president is to legally protect the office of president at all costs,
right.
sort of. I mean, that is his job. I mean, maybe we'll get into a bit later exactly how innocent John Dean is, because I sort of feel like he went along with it until he realised he might get in trouble, and then he cut his losses.
Right.
Maybe that's a harsh reading of it, but we'll see what you think when I tell you all about it. But someone like Daniel Ellsberg or Snowden, they seem like they totally didn't have to do what they did, but they did it because of their conscience.
Yeah.
And they're going to potentially face a lifetime in prison. That seems a lot braver to me than what John Dean did, even though he was a whistleblower and it was good, and it was ultimately a great thing, really, that he did. But it was when I think he realised his ass was on the line.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah. I mean, at this point, by sort of mid-September, Watergate has kind of fallen out of the news. I think even the Washington Post isn't really running front cover headlines about it or anything. The grand jury have indicted the 7, i.e. the 5 actual burglars, Hunt and Liddy, and they stopped there. And Nixon and the White House are really, really happy about that. They're like, oh, it will get cut off at Liddy, at the level of Liddy, and they won't even go to Magruder or Mitch or anything. So that's sort of great for them. And the polls show that American people don't really care about Watergate at all. They think it's just a minor sort of Washington story.
When was all the Washington Post stuff? Like, at what point in the story is all the movie bit happening and
right? Yeah, I mean the Washington Post stuff. Yeah, the Washington Post are on it from the beginning, and they run lots of headlines to begin with. But then in this period, it goes a bit quiet. But then a few months later, after the election, it blows up. And there's a specific day in sort of spring '73 where they run with a big expose, and that totally blows up. Everyone starts running their stories.
Right.
So yeah, it sort of ebbs and flows, but they're on it from the beginning.
Right.
Oh, I don't know. I've read some very nice things about you.
Maybe where you come from, but where I come from, Dick Nixon is as misunderstood as a fox in a hen house. And do you know why? Because, my darling, they all think that your smile and your face are never in the same place at the same time. You and me, we're going to have to work on that, sweetie.
Someone fresh in Martha's drink. I think she's down a quart.
Well, zippity-doo-dah.